thanks for joining us with our Migratory Raptors of Pack Monadnock presentation tonight. My name is Nico. I am one of the newer teacher naturalists at the Harris Center, and I'm so thankful to be here. I also am the new summer camp director and winter camp director. So if you have any kids or grandkids, I probably got to meet them this summer and will be your point of contact next summer. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it right over to Phil. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Nico. Yeah, I'll just say a little bit about the Harris Center first, but I'll introduce myself. I'm Phil Brown. My title at the Harris Center for Conservation Education is the Bird Conservation Director. I've been with the Harris Center for about 5 years in some capacity. And actually what brought me to the Harris Center in the first place was the Pack Monadnock Raptor Observatory. So we are a land trust or an environmental education organization and a group that does conservation research as well. So we have 3 main focus areas, and the Harris Center has been reaching students and all people in the community for over 50 years through programming of all kinds to all ages. We are a land trust. We have 26,000 acres in conservation of some sort, whether it be conservation easements or fee-owned land. A lot of that has trails, and these places are open to the public for activities, low-impact recreation, birding, hiking, snowshoeing, all those good things. And last, we are a conservation research organization. So we look closely at some of the species and types of wildlife and plants and ecosystems that are in the Monadnock region, which is our focus area in southwestern New Hampshire. So welcome all of you. Thanks for being part of this. And if you're new to the Harris Center, welcome. And if you've been around a while, also good to see your faces. I think the common thread here today is going to be migratory raptors. So I assume you all have some sort of interest or background, intrigued by these raptors. Maybe some of you have been up to Pack Monadnock in Peterborough, our long-term hawk watching site. That's a site that I'm fortunate to run through the Harris Center, and have been involved with it for almost 15 years now. So great place to go in the fall, and I'll tell you all about it right now. So yeah, put those questions in the chat if you have any questions that come up, and I'll cover a lot of ground here tonight. So I'm just gonna kind of jump right into it, and Nico will jump in if I have anything to clarify. But otherwise, let's talk a little bit about raptors. Let me see if this thing. There we go. All right. Can you see that panel, Hawks there? Thumbs up, Nico. Looks good. Okay. So we're moving here. This is if any of you have ever been up to Pack, you've seen this panel at the Hawkwatch platform in the fall. And basically it depicts 15 different species of raptors that are species that we'll see throughout the season, most seasons anyway. So just a quick overview. But one thing we should start by covering is what raptors are, really defining what we'll be talking about tonight. And generally, these are going to be birds with killing talons and hooked beaks. They have great eyesight. They're carnivores. There are no vegetarian raptors, I like to say. We talk about eagles, hawks, falcons, harriers, kites, things like that. And for the purposes of hawk watching, we also include vultures, even though they do not kill their own food, but they're important as well, and they migrate similar to hawks. And I'll use these terms interchangeably: hawks, birds of prey, and raptors quite a bit. And for the purposes of my talk, I'm really not going to be talking about owls and the nocturnal raptors, even though they certainly deserve a lot of attention themselves. So a few questions that I'll attempt to answer and pose throughout the program here tonight include why we go hawk watching, what is our role in New Hampshire, how they're faring, how do we identify them? That's going to be a big focus of this talk, and where are these raptors going? Just kind of introduce a few of these topics. So definitely not going to get all your questions answered probably, but at least it'll introduce you to a few of the concepts. So a little bit about migration monitoring. This is one of the longest standing ways of monitoring raptor populations and bird populations in general. Hawk watching, standing up on top of a mountain at the same time every year in the same place, doing it the same way is what we like to think of as standardized long-term count. And this is what we've been doing at PAC for 19 years now, through staffing and volunteers. Why else do we do it? It's a ton of fun. It's a really engaging way for all ages. Kids really light up to raptors. It's a great way for them to connect with the natural world, maybe for the first time. And really all people. We see thousands of people every year just fascinated by the spectacle going on overhead. And it has benefits for us, but also benefits for the natural world, especially the raptors that need our protection. And we strongly believe that education is a very important first step there. So there's reason for concern because raptors do have a lot of threats that they face. Globally, about half of raptor species have declined, and about a fifth are threatened with extinction. So pretty alarming figures. And lots of different threats. In New Hampshire, quite a few of these species also are threatened or have declined a little bit. I'll get into that list shortly, but list of threats is pretty long and growing, and includes lots of human-made structures, vehicles, power lines, all kinds of things that traditionally have killed raptors, including chemicals, and climate change is posing a role as well, posing a threat to raptors. So the list of New Hampshire's breeding raptors, there are a few species that are called out for particular concern because of their status in the state. The golden eagle is really not a breeder anymore, but it's still on the list of state endangered species, as is the northern harrier, which is down to just a few pairs in very far northern New Hampshire. State threatened peregrine falcon, and a little bit less concerned, the bald eagle has been removed from all of these lists. That it has recovered really well over the last 40 years. American kestrel, though, is trending the other direction. We have lots of different raptor migration sites that are doing the same thing that we're doing here in the Monadnock region, about 220 throughout the course of the year. A lot of these are in the fall. A lot of them are in the Northeast, as you can see here. And several of these are pretty long-term count sites that have been recording this data year after year the same way. So we have a pretty good idea of some of these declines and also some of the recoveries. And several groups a bunch of years back got together and created this tool for monitoring raptor populations called the Raptor Population Index. A group of research organizations collaborated, and periodically they perform an analysis. They look at data from lots of different hawkwatch sites, and we're one of those 65 that's included in the most recent analysis. The next analysis comes out in 2022, and we should actually, this is 2023. It should be available very soon. But what we've learned in from the last analysis anyway, there are a few species that are increasing. There are several that are stable, and there's a big group that has shown a decrease in the east. And this really speaks to the migratory status of these species. So there may be populations that are non-migratory or that are staying further north because things are changing. Birds are staying further north in winters a lot of the time, but we've seen some clear decreases that some declines that we think are linked to actual population drops, and that's where a lot of these data can be shared with biologists and managers, so some decisions can be made to help recover them. So basically, I'm going to provide some tips here on when to go out and look. This weather that we had today, many of us probably are in the Monadnock region. experienced this nice, cool, refreshing air. Finally, all the humidity cleared out. This is the kind of weather that really gets the hawks moving. And it happened this afternoon, from what I understand. I wasn't up there today, but the report from the mountain was that nearly 1,000 birds migrated today. Before that, for the first 13 days of the month, we only had about 200 migrants total. So this was a little bit of a late start, but expected that we were going to get this push when the weather changed. And so it's beginning now with the broadwings. And mid-September to mid-October in general is going to be the time to look for most of the species in the largest numbers. They all have slightly different timetables, though, and that depends on their own food and diet and how their migration has evolved over time. So it's very different because they all go to different places. I'll try to cover a little bit of that here. So just a few ideas here on where to go hawk watching. Pack Monadnock is certainly not the only place where you can see really good numbers, but it is the longest standing hawk watch in New Hampshire at this point. But there are other spots in the Lakes region, on the seacoast, the Connecticut River Valley, north-facing mountaintops or ridge lines that are able to really funnel raptors in a certain way because they're following rivers, they're following ridge lines, and getting updrafts off of the western slope of a lot of the mountains. So times to get out would include these high pressure systems of air that we just got, the cold fronts that have come through that clear out the humid air. A little bit of a western or northern component is best in the wind. And then I usually tell folks, like, listen to the songbirds because they're keeping an eye on the skies. Their survival depends on it. So if the songbirds are chattering about some danger, there might be a hawk nearby. And that's just, one little tip when you're out there looking. And also keep an eye on this website called hawkcount.org, in which we make daily predictions about the next day. They're not always right. So here's what it looks like up on the summit. And this is a long-term research and education project, now fully run by the Harris Center in partnership with New Hampshire State Parks. And just a few fun scenes from the mountain here. A couple of these involve Raptor Release Day, in which we let a rehabilitated bird go. Sometimes several birds that have been nursed back to health get to be set back into the natural worlds in front of onlookers. That's always a fun day. Okay, so let's get into what we see up here. This pie chart shows that 3/4 of the total birds we see in the course of every season, more or less, are broad-winged hawks. They congregate in huge numbers. They fly together. There are a lot that nest in our area, but also many that are coming from north and east of us, I think. So we don't exactly know where all of them are coming from, but we can assume that there's a pretty big population funneling through our area because of the numbers we see all the way down the Appalachians. And then the second most common species, sharp-shinned hawk, is a little sliver here, and the rest of the 13 or so species makes up the rest. A whole bunch of numbers on this sheet, so I don't expect you to digest a lot of this, but the column in the middle shows an average count for the list of species, so you can see how that breaks down a little bit, species by species. Some we see just a handful of. Golden eagles, we see about 8 a year. Broad-winged hawks, over 8,000, and lots in between. The 2022 count, last fall's count, shows a few of the particularly high numbers in blue, higher than usual, and lower than usual numbers in red. So the ospreys went missing, but we saw lots of turkey vultures last year. So you might think, hawk watching, how hard could it be, right? It's a bald eagle, everybody knows that. But usually, here's a close look at a bald eagle when you're hawk watching. Birds far away, how do we know this is a bald eagle? We're going to have to rely on a few other field marks, such as the overall size and the shape of the bird. Looking at behavior, which is impossible to determine from a still shot, of course. Coloration and pattern. If you really are lucky, you can get some details on this, but a lot of the time we don't have that luxury of being able to see any sort of patterning. The bird is in either poor lighting or just really far away. Our optics have limitations. And then another key one is it solo or is it in a large group of birds? So I'll go over each one of these steps. I like to say these are some of the steps in keying out what might be, how to get to the identification. So overall size and shape. Two birds in this photo. You can see one is really big, one is really small. They're both hawks. Their last name ends in hawk. One is on the right is obviously has a different body shape. It has big, broad, long wings, a shorter tail in relation to its body. This is a red-tailed hawk. You might be thinking, where's the red tail? I don't see the red tail. So it's important to know that all of the young red-tailed hawks don't show that field mark until they're of breeding age. The bird on the left, for size comparison, is tiny. It's about the size of a blue jay. This is a sharp-shinned hawk, tiny little, fierce little bird that likes to pick a fight with everything bigger than it. They have a long tail, short, rounded wings, and they go after lots of other birds. So behavior, if you get to see that, sometimes you see the interaction in the air and you can start to get a clue as to what it might be. And then, if you're lucky enough to see two birds together, you can get that overall size and shape. But overall size and shape is something that is derived from really spending a lot of time watching the birds, looking at how they're moving. Are they moving really quickly? Are they making short circles, or are they taking their time making a big, lazy, slow circle? That'll give you an idea of their overall size anyway. Do they fly alone, or do they flock up like these broadwings? There are a few species that form large flocks in our area. So that's a good clue. If you see a large flock, it might be broadwings, it might be turkey vultures. Not going to be too much else at this point. And then coloration and pattern. These two birds look very different from each other. If at a close look, you can see there's differences in color. They are the same species. One is an adult on the left, and one is a young on the right. These are both red-shouldered hawks. But it's important to look at some of those features, like the tail banding, any sort of coloration that you might get underneath. The red-shouldered hawk shows, especially on the upper shoulders, shows kind of a brownish red. But here you can see that underneath too. And sometimes the birds are that close where we can enjoy that, but it's not all the time. And young birds, I should point out, have a lot of streaking from head to tail. That's a typical young raptor plumage, is that they will have this streaking from head to tail. Adults usually have barring going across the chest. Not for every species, but that's a generalization anyway. And just by silhouette, looking at a few of the groups that we were looking at compared to each other in size. So eagles, obviously massive up above, and falcons, they come in a few different sizes, but they all have that sickle wing shape, pointed wings, angled at the wrist. The wrist of the bird is right in the middle of the wing there. Okay, so we'll jump into the family groups. This is the Buteos. We'll start with them. They're what we think of as the typical classic hawks. They have they're chunky birds. They're kind of beefy in general, with relatively long, broad wings and often fanned out tails, kind of broad tails. And they rely heavily on the wind to carry them to where they're going. So they are, Pete Dunn refers to them as the wind masters in one of his famous books about raptors. Here is another look at, I think that's the same image I showed earlier of a red-tailed hawk, the youngster, of course, not having a red tail. So a few key field marks on red-tailed hawks. They're large and they're bulky. They're big, beefy birds. They're bigger than crows. They soar typically in slow circles, and they hold their wings relatively flat, maybe a little bit of a dihedral, a V shape in the wings, but the wingtips, the primary feathers often point upward. if you see them really well. The adult has the red tail, but all plumages usually show a belly band or a brown belt going right across an otherwise very white underside, very white chest. So it's kind of like a jagged looking bunch of brown marks. And the other thing about these red tails is they have these dark leading edge of the wing area near the head called the patagial area, the patagial feathers, patagial wing bones. So that's going to be a really dark spot. That's distinctive in red-tailed hawks compared to other buteos. And for each species too, I'm just going to throw in a couple of graphs here showing their long-term trends as of the last raptor population index. So as of 2019 anyway, looking at the numbers that we have from Pack up top, and looking at about a 7.4% decline per year at Pack. And it's thought that red-tailed hawks are not necessarily decreasing in overall population, but they're just becoming a little less migratory. So they're expanding their range further to the north, maybe in the winter, and maybe they don't have to go quite as far as they used to. So this could be a climate change related issue for broad-winged hawks. So it's a little hard to understand completely if it's population related or if it's this other factor called short stopping. So here's an image of the red tail on the bottom right with the wingtips upward that I was telling you about, and that classic red flag of a tail. They also do a little bit of hovering sometimes, or kiting in midair. Well, they'll stop in one spot and keep their head really still, locked in on prey, while they're moving their wings to keep them really honed in. All right, the red-shouldered hawk is the red-tail's slightly smaller cousin, a little bit smaller and slimmer than a red tail. And they soar with their wings slightly forward and above the horizon. You can see this one where the wings kind of arch a little forward toward the head. The adults, they have these red shoulder patches on the upper side of the wing and also on the lower side. And the youngster you saw earlier. Red-shouldered hawks have a really neatly banded tail, lots of thin brown and white tail bands. You'll want to look at that, compare that to the broad-winged hawk that we're going to see next, which has thicker and fewer black and white tail bands. Rose up here. There we go. Okay. Red-shouldered hawks are increasing. We've certainly been seeing a lot more of these in the Northeast in the past 20 years or so. Since our early days at Pack, where we saw maybe 50 in a season, we're now well up over 200. We had 302 last year for a record high. So one bird that's increasing, seemingly finding more favorable habitat or expanding its range to the Northeast. How about this bird? That's not a raptor at all, but I feel like I need to throw it in here because they're about the same size as the buteos, and they do a lot of raptor mimicry up at the Hawkwatch. We see a lot of ravens. The common raven is a master soarer. They keep their wings out and they do a lot of just gliding around. They also are really acrobatic and can do a lot of flapping and are very vocal. But they have a big round wedge-shaped tail, a head that sticks way out, and you can often see their bill too. But otherwise about the same size as a red-shouldered or almost a red-tailed hawk size. It's a really large bird, but they are jet black too. If you get them in good light, you're not going to see any of the hawks look completely black. And so that's a giveaway. So here we are at the Broadwings, the star of the show. There's that tail that's banded heavily with black and white. It's the smallest of the buteos. It's crow-sized, so it's about 3 foot in wingspan compared to, say, 4 feet for a red-tailed hawk, and much, much lighter as well. Even though it's a bulky-looking bird, you can see how they're kind of chunky-bodied. They soar with a tapered wingtip. You can see how the wings kind of come to a point, especially in this image here of a young broad-winged hawk. They have what we call a candle flame appearance to the wingtips, thinking about a candle, the top of a candle, the flame, and dark wing linings, which shows up in both adult and young plumages. almost like it was kind of dipped in chocolate, I like to think, the tips and the rear ends of the wing. And they form these really large groups. They also have these really bulging secondary feathers that make them look kind of muscular, just kind of even beefier than they are. But a really neat bird, and a great chance to study them right now over the next week or so. If you want to see broad-winged hawks in numbers, come up to Pack on a good day really soon. And their numbers have varied between maybe 6,000 to 16,000 in a season for us. And they're relatively stable, even though they've varied so greatly. We've seen relative stability to their numbers. And yeah, so here's what it could look like on a really crazy day of broad-winged hawks, many hundreds together in the sky, and lots of oohs and ahs when that happens. That will happen in the next week or so. This is the species that we've been studying at the Harris Center. This is one of the species that we partnered with Hawk Mountain to take a closer look at broad-winged hawk territories in the Monadnock region. And we've outfitted several females, especially with transmitters. And they're providing us with data on how these birds move throughout their entire lifespans, as long as the transmitters last. So these two different colors represent two different nesting birds in Dublin and Harrisville, each moving around differently in the breeding season, and also showing where they both ended up in Colombia in the winter. These two ended up spending time in pretty close proximity to each other in both the nesting season in New Hampshire and winter in Colombia. And they're on their move. They're on the move right now. We just had one bird check in on the live tracker. So yeah, more updates to come. If you follow the Harris Center field reports, I'll post a link to that later on, and you can see where our birds are. Okay, back to the hawk watch. We do occasionally get a rare buteo, but we've only seen a handful of these. The bird on top right is more of a winter hawk in New England. It's a rough-legged hawk, often seen in the seacoast area and coastal regions and grasslands, but we've had a few records at Pack. And on the bottom is a very rare species in the east, the Swainson's hawk, that I think we have 2 or 3 records of at Pack. So don't expect that, but occasionally it does happen. Yeah, let's get into, we're going to get into the accipiters here. These are the hawks that have small, short wings. They're medium-sized in general. They have really long, narrow tails, and they generally are thought to do a lot of flapping when we see them. They have to work really hard to get where they're going. So sharp-shinned hawk, first bird here. It's the smallest of the accipiters, the one that was really feisty in the other image with the red tail. It's about the size of a blue jay. They flap really rapidly and pretty often. These birds have really snappy wing beats, which bend at the wrist, which again is that middle part of the wing. The wrist bone of the bird is right here in the upper front. Can you see my cursor, Nico? Is that coming on? Okay, good. So yeah, snappy wing beats. They sometimes just appear as little flashes in the sky at a distance. And they are often solo, but sometimes they're in small numbers of up to 3 or 4. The adult plumage is more of a kind of a handsome orangey banded look. This is a streaky youngster. The young ones have that streaking again from head to tail with a lot of white on the underside. There's that image again. Tiny, feisty. Their numbers are relatively stable year to year, although slightly declining. We had very few last year relatively to these numbers. Definitely a significant drop in the norm. So we're not really sure what's going on, but they're thought to be declining in population in some parts of their range. Cooper's hawk, on the other hand, is a species on the increase, as maybe some of the reason the sharpsins are declining. Hawks will eat hawks, and Coopers have been implicated in kestrel declines and potentially eating smaller hawks like sharpshins. This one has just eaten a meal. This one has a full crop, so it has a big lump in its throat. probably a songbird in there. This is a juvenile young bird. Juvenile, immature, we'll use those terms interchangeably as well. Cooper's hawks will have longer, straighter wings in general. The head projects further in front of the body than the sharp-shinned hawk. And their tail often appears rounded at a distance, but that field mark is not perfect. We try to piece together the ID. And with these two species, they're really close in size. They're close in a lot of these field marks. It takes many years to really hone in on an accurate identification. And yeah, well, some of our most frequent disagreements at the Hawkwatch will involve exhibitor ID. So it happens even among the experts. We're always learning, and yeah, it's worth gathering as much information as you can from every bird that you see. So a good way of trying to discern these two in flight, the Cooper's looks more like a flying cross, and the sharp-shinned hawk is more of a flying capital letter T, because of the head being shorter. So that really holds true a lot of the time, but these birds don't always hold themselves in a way that facilitates an easy identification. So it takes a lot of experience and a lot of patience. Cooper's hawks actually declining as a migrating bird, but they also are probably getting less migratory and settling down in cities and farms where they can get easy pickings from starlings and pigeons and a lot of our residential birds. So they don't have to go as far. Northern goshawk, it's the largest of the accipiter. It's the rarest. We see only a handful of these, a couple of dozen in a season now. We used to see a lot more. And these are a big bird, almost as big as a crow or bigger than a crow, almost the size of a raven. Really bulky, big, broad chests, big, thick, stout base of the tail. And they don't have exactly the same wing shape as the other two accipiters. You'll notice a little bit of a tapered wingtip, longer wings in general. The adults are this slate gray color. They have a dark eye stripe. And the youngsters look like this. They're a little more streaky on the underside. Yeah, generally just a bird that we don't see a ton of, and we used to see a lot more of. And that's been the trend throughout a lot of the northern states. And this is a bird that's disappearing from many of its traditional breeding locations in places to our south. So we're just not seeing as many go south anymore because we think their range is retracting to the north a little bit more. But they're still, a species we're trying to learn a little bit more about. They're declining at about 10% per year as a migrant. So probably the most alarming of all the declines. And now let's get into the falcons here. Any questions at this point, Nico? Anything come up that needs clarification?
We do have a question about crows and ravens, but it could wait till the end. Nothing to clarify anything that you've been kind of saying about the different types or anything.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's move on to falcons now. Falcons, they have this long pointed wingtip shape and long tail. You can see the wing shape in these silhouettes that are up here in the top right and bottom left are distinctly like a pinpoint almost at the tip. Compare that to the more rounded wings of the accipiters, which have overall a pretty similar size and body shape, other than those wingtips to a falcon. So they're falcons come in a couple of different sizes. The bird pictured here, you may recognize as a peregrine falcon, an adult bird with that really strong, almost helmeted look. Looks like it's ready for battle. It has a big white throat area, lots of gray and white underneath. Really long wings, really muscular bird. So those wings are super thick too. They're known as the fastest flying birds. Usually the kids who come up, school groups who come up to pack, if you ask, what's your favorite bird? This one is going to get the most votes, even more than golden eagle and bald eagle. So they're strong flyers. They're built for both speed and stamina. All right, peregrine falcon. Here's a youngster. Looks very different in plumage. This is the largest of the falcons. They're bigger than crows. The females are always bigger than males. This is something I'm meant to mention before, is that there's a lot of size variation in these birds, sometimes as much as a third larger than a male. So female raptors are all going to be bigger than their male counterparts. And that evolved for nest defense, because the females are often sitting with the nests. They had to be bigger to keep a lot of the threats away, and also specializing so males and females could go after different sized prey in years of shortages in food. So it helped to have two different sizes of prey to focus on, so they can feed young and rear offspring. So peregrine falcons are often identified in flight by their powerful rowing wing motion, and those wings just beat so effortlessly, and there's just something about how they move that kind of makes you think this isn't something smaller. It's a bigger bird. They often do a lot of soaring too. Their tails, this tail is nice and narrow and pointed, but their tails do fan out, as all the falcons can show that look, but peregrines do a lot of soaring. And then they have that bold facial pattern. They're known for their aerial antics as well. This is a pair that I think nested locally in close by in Massachusetts. That Andre, who's with us on the call tonight, took this photo. Beautiful shot. Peregrines are on the increase. This is a species that's been brought back from the state endangered list. Really a species that almost disappeared completely, and is now doing quite well in the Northeast on both cliff nesting sites and also on buildings and bridges. Merlin is like a mini peregrine falcon, a little bit smaller, quite a bit smaller, much shorter winged, but also a very powerful bird-eating falcon. These guys are really fast and really feisty, very dark. They have very thick wings too that extend a long way along the body, so really providing power to the bird. They're often solo, but they're often going after other birds, like the sharp-shinned hawk does the same thing. So sometimes a merlin goes by and you just have a second to see it, and some people will say merlin should be a one-syllable word because of how quickly it goes by. You don't often get more than 1 second with them. But we see a fair number at Pack. I think we're already up to a couple of dozen already this season. So they're moving now, and it's a good chance to see them. We have a decoy owl at Pack that gets a lot of attention from the merlins and sharp-shinned hawks. So those two come in and give it a second look. They think it's a threat, so they come in and try to scare it away. And the merlin, for as feisty and fast it is, the American kestrel, about the same size. It's also a falcon, but it's quite the opposite. It's more of like I'd say a lollygagging bird. It's just kind of taking its time. It's just easygoing. Has a floppy flight. It's very buoyant, kind of bouncing around. It's a small and slim bird, really delicate looking, but it's a hunter. It's a fierce hunter as well. It goes after a lot of small rodents, snakes, small birds, a lot of insects. This is the male, which has both this bluish gray on the wings and the reddish orange on the back. The females only have the orangey color on the back. And if you've been following what we're doing at the Harris Center, we've started a nest box program because these birds are declining at a pretty considerable rate. Fairly stable right now at Pack, but a lot of the other sites in the Northeast have seen bigger declines. And the map on the bottom right here shows regions of North America where kestrels are declining as a breeding bird. The graph on the bottom left shows the Northeast population, which has declined something like 60% over 60 years that the breeding bird survey has been done. So species we're concerned about. And as a result, the kestrel monitoring project that we started at the Harris Center had several goals, and I won't go over all of this now, but just introducing you to to this neat project, and we've set up nest boxes at about 25 different locations in southwestern New Hampshire. Just a few images here of what some of these nest boxes look like on the landscape. And this summer we were lucky enough to have 4 of them occupied, and they raised 17 young, which we got to band and monitor. So we'll be able to track these guys a little bit better in future years, hopefully. All right, on to the osprey, the fish hawk. And this is one of the larger birds we're going to see at the Hawk Watch. It has about a 5-foot wingspan, large and long-winged. It has a really small head compared to the size of its body, almost comically small. It has a shape of wings that kind of looks like a capital letter M. You can see the extreme bend in the wrist, just the way their wings are shaped when they're soaring and flying. They have dark patches near that wrist bend as well. And otherwise, it's one of the whitest hawks on the underside. You won't see any streaking on the belly or down up in the upper chest. The one faint field mark here in the neck is that the females especially will have this little brown flecking that's referred to as a necklace. The males will sometimes have a little trace of it, but the females mostly show that. So it's one of the whitest birds on the underside, but very mottled overall. And they're really powerful flyers. They can soar masterfully. They look like big gulls just kind of soaring around the way gulls do when you're looking at them at the beach. And they also do quite a bit of steady flapping. They're very strong, obviously carrying large fish is what they eat year round. This one that was banded in Newfoundland several years ago was tracked by Project Osprey, and it flew way out over the ocean and came into South Carolina something like 3 or 4 days later. So it flew completely over the ocean without stopping all that time, flying over 2,200 miles over the ocean. And so they're really powerful. No doubt, I'm sure there are some that are going to be impacted by the hurricane right now that's heading north when a lot of them are heading south down the coast. So hopefully they fare okay. But ospreys are declining. At least the migratory coastal populations or inland populations, I should say, seem to be declining. Looking at data from all the other Hawkwatch sites in the Northeast inland areas, we've seen very similar trends. So not really sure what's going on. We know these birds go a long way. They go into South America in the winter, and there are a handful of threats there that are a little bit harder to quantify. But any bird that goes a long distance that's a raptor faces many of these threats throughout the year. Northern harrier, we're getting toward the end of the list here. Northern harrier is in its own family for North America. That's our only harrier. They're generally medium to large size bird, and they're lanky. They're really long and skinny. They have slender wings and a long, narrow tail. The males are gray, like this gray ghost here. They're often referred to as the gray ghost. And we see a lot fewer males. They tend to fly a little bit later in the season. They have these black wingtips, really handsome, striking bird. And the females are kind of brownish, and then the juveniles, the young ones of the year, are very golden underneath, maybe like this bird here. They fly with a dihedral, the V shape in the wings, very similar to turkey vultures. They hold their wings in a very similar V that turkey vultures show. But they're very steady flyers. They have a steady wing beat and kind of a bouncy, buoyant flight as well. Always a neat bird to see at the Hawkwatch. We see maybe 80 to 100 every year, but they have been declining. They're a species of conservation concern in a lot of states and state endangered in New Hampshire, as I mentioned earlier. On to the eagles. There are 2 eagles that we'll see throughout the season, and these are always going to be among the largest and the darkest birds we see in the air. They have 7 to 8 foot wingspans. These are really powerful flying birds. There's a lot of variation in the plumage. You can see here, you might be tempted to jump to an identification of one on the left and saying, oh, that's definitely a golden eagle because of that white inner tail and darker tip of the tail, but that's a younger bald eagle. And we know that from structural characteristics, but also where the white shows up in the wings. So there are a few subtle differences in teasing apart bald and golden eagle that we have to pay special attention to later in the season when the goldens start coming through. Yeah, goldens are late fall. We'll see them in a few of them in October into November. But yeah, bald eagles hold their wings really flat. They look like a flying 2x8. The head projects like this one on the right. Actually, both of them show it really well. But the head is projecting about as far forward as the tail projects back from the wings. So it's kind of like an equal size. So compare that to, I'm just going to jump ahead. Well, it's obvious here to the golden eagle. The golden eagle has a tiny little projecting head that's about half the length of the tail. So one of those field marks, trying to get those measurements and the exact look to see the head versus the tail, that's not easy, but that's one of the clues we'll look for at the hawk watch. By the way, this is a big 4-foot red-tailed hawk chasing the golden eagle, just to show you how massive these guys are. Backing up here to bald eagles again. Yeah, the head projects far. Yeah, structurally though, really flat in the wings. This is something that really doesn't change when they're soaring anyway. Bald eagles, as I mentioned earlier, they've increased over the last 40 years from really one pair in New Hampshire back in the late 1980s. And now there are over 100, as of this year, 100 territorial pairs in New Hampshire. So what a story of success. Just shows what we can do when we put our mind to it to help conserve a species. And also some of that was their natural recovery from the chemical DDT, which was thinning their eggshells. They were really decimated. So yeah, the winter eagle survey shows that bald eagles number in the 100+ number now every winter, and now there are about 100 pairs in the state. At the hawk watch, we've seen in recent years upwards of 200. They keep breaking records year after year, but finally it seemed to level off this year. But yeah, bird that's just still on the increase, filling in gaps where it doesn't currently nest. Here's the golden eagle. Here's a young golden eagle, which shows that white on the tail, the base of the tail, and a little bit of white in the middle of the wings. And here's what it's named for, these golden feathers in the back of the head, which sometimes we get that kind of a look at Pack. And that's just a really stunning look when we see a golden that well. So yeah, you'd have to put your time in for one of those, or just luck out and be there on the right day. But usually there are only about 8 or so goldens per year. So you won't get too many chances. But yeah, they look really large. They have long wings, just like the balds, and they hold their wings in a slight dihedral. So like a little bit between a turkey vulture and a bald eagle. The vulture, which has the extreme V shape in the wings. Here we are. And bald eagle, which holds its wings really flat. So the goldens are a little bit more of a V. Yeah, so here's that vulture right at the end here into the vultures. These are also big, dark birds at a distance. We're often seeing these birds at 3 or 4 or more miles away initially when we pick them up. So a bird that far away, that's an eagle or a vulture, it actually appears like it's black at a distance compared to something that would be like a smaller hawk, which appears a little bit lighter underneath. So when we say large, dark bird, it's usually an eagle or a vulture. Vultures have really small heads, no feathers on their heads, and they have longer tails, at least the turkey vultures do. They have that strong dihedral, and they do lots of teetering, rocking back and forth. A very congregatory bird as well. Turkey vultures fly in big flocks. They're on the increase, at least in this part of the country. We're seeing a lot of vultures. year after year, breaking records. And increasingly, we're seeing a few black vultures now. This is the third year already that we've had black vultures, 3 years in a row now at Pack. Just one or two, but this is a southern bird that's really only made a recent appearance into northern New England. So a bird on the rise, and you can see the two sitting side by side on the ground there for comparison. But in flight, the black vulture appears a lot shorter winged. It appears that it almost doesn't have a tail as well. So it's just kind of a funny looking bird that flaps its wings really quickly. So it usually stands out because of its behavior, more so than its coloration underneath. All right, so with that, I think we're coming to the end here, hopefully right on time. Here's what you can do. You can contribute to our research efforts. We appreciate the public support. This is the only way we can keep this Hawkwatch staffed. We reach over 6,000 people every year directly, including hundreds of school kids. Nico is going to be one of the educators who's going to be up at Pack about once a week, working with school groups and visiting groups. So we appreciate all your support. You can learn more about the other Hawkwatch sites throughout the Americas on the Humana website. And come visit us at Miller State Park. Check out those links there. And with that, I think you're ready for hawk watching, and I could take some questions. Here's just a list of resources that I'll leave up for a minute. But Nico, I'll turn it over to you, and we have a few minutes for questions, I think.
That's great. Thanks, Phil. So we have a few really good questions. The first one is from Thomas asking, do crows and ravens make alarm sounds similar to songbirds if raptors are present?
Okay, interesting question. Do crows and ravens make alarm sounds? So crows and ravens are masterful vocalists. They're some of the largest of the songbirds. Ravens in particular say a lot of different things, and they mean a lot of different things as well. So I've definitely seen them interacting a lot with hawks. They seem to play a lot at the summit with hawks, and often escorting eagles out of the area. They feel really threatened by the bigger raptors, like the eagles. At least that's my interpretation of it. When it comes to the calls, though, I think it's I couldn't tell you for sure if it's alarm, but yeah, there's definitely some language there that might need further research. Sorry, I don't know for sure.
Thank you. Okay, so the next two are to do with when you're actually identifying the birds. So this next one comes from Jean asking, how do you count with birds in motion and in groups like that?
Oh, okay. So Jean's wondering how we get accurate counts of birds moving in the groups, probably, I'm guessing. Yeah, with a lot of long-term commitments to watching birds. Usually, on some days like today, we're seeing broad-winged hawks that might be traveling in groups of more than 100 at a time, and they're often a swirling mix, and they're going every direction all at once. When they're swirling like that, we call it kettling. They're swirling like the like hot steam coming off of a kettle. We just enjoy them when that happens, honestly. If we have a chance to wait for them to kind of stream off from the kettle, that's the time that we'll start counting them. And if it's small numbers, we can count them individually fairly accurately. Sometimes we'll have to estimate groups of 5 or 10 or more. Yeah, the largest group I saw in New Hampshire, I think, was like 1,200 birds or something moving through, and I was trying to group them by 10s or 20s at the time, and they were just kind of shooting by. So yeah, it takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of practice. Our hawk watchers have been doing this for a long time. We're always welcoming folks to come up alongside us and learn. So anybody can come visit and see the counters in action and just get right in the mix. Ask questions, and yeah, that's what's great about it, is that we've kind of trained our crew from the ground up there. And now we have quite a following of regulars who have a lot of the skills and help keep this watch going year after year. So yeah, it's not easy. But I appreciate your question. Thanks, Gene.
Okay, last question we had in the chat was, to what extent do you use vocalizations to identify birds? When I hear an osprey cry, I know to look to the sky. This is from Helena.
How often do you use vocalizations? Yeah, I think as a birder, I'm very attuned to bird vocalizations. So that's often a way I'm going to detect songbirds, especially. Less so raptors, though. Raptors are they tend to be quiet for long periods of time throughout certain times of the year. In migration, not many of them are calling. Every once in a while, we'll hear a broad-winged calling in migration, or maybe a sharp-shinned hawk that's attacking something. But a lot of the time, it's going to be you're finding these birds with your eyes. And you can't always believe what you hear, is what I've come to learn. So take the blue jay, for example. The blue jay can imitate just about every other raptor in North America that's around it really effectively. And a lot of the times fools me because it's spot on for a broad-winged hawk or a Cooper's hawk or whatever it might be trying to identify or it might be trying to mimic. And it's thought that blue jays do this so they can scare some other birds away and then take advantage of a food source. So they're really smart. They're corvids like ravens and crows. Sometimes you have to kind of see it and hear it in order to accurately identify it. But yeah, good question. And yeah, I'd encourage everybody to come up and learn more. This is really the time to get out hawk watching if you can. It's good later in the season too, but if you want to see the big numbers, come in the next week or two, and make sure to make a reservation at Miller State Park. It's strongly recommended because the place gets really busy during broadwing season. There are lots of people who've been waiting for this moment for many months, and they take a couple of weeks off and just kind of spend time waiting for the birds. So okay, thanks so much, everybody, for your attention, and I hope you learned a little something today, and that you can get out and apply that, even if it's right in your own backyard.